In 1838, a Hungarian count named Gustav Batthyány made a grand gesture that would puzzle historians for nearly 2 centuries. He donated his entire personal library to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Among the leather-bound volumes and parchment manuscripts and the rare tomes was one book unlike anything else in the collection. It had no title, no author, and no clear origin, only a strange, tightly written script that no one could read. This was the Rohonc Codex, a manuscript that seemed to have stepped straight out of a riddle. Its last known home before this donation was the small town of Rohonc today, Recknitz in Austria. But beyond that, the record goes cold. There is no documented chain of ownership, no mention of a scribe or a commissioner, and the codex has simply appeared in the historical record as if it had dropped through a crack in time. Today, the manuscript is kept under careful guard in the Hungarian Academy's library in Budapest. Only a handful of scholars have ever been allowed to examine the fragile original. The physical details of the codex are modest at first glance. It's a small paper volume with 448 pages, each filled with 9 to 14 lines of symbols. The text runs right to left, neatly justified at the right margin, with no obvious punctuation, but the script itself defies easy categorization. Nearly 800 distinct characters, far more than any known alphabet, and some appear repeatedly, others only once or twice. This extreme variety is one reason why breaking the code has proven so difficult. If it is a simple cipher, it is unlike any other. Between the dense lines of writing lie 87 illustrations, each as enigmatic as the text. They depict scenes that mix Christian crosses, Islamic crescents, and what might be pagan sun symbols. Soldiers stand beside priests. Women in flowing robes appear in processions. Fortified towns overlook bodies of water. These aren't crude doodles, they are deliberate, consistent, and stylistically unified. If the text is nonsense, the images are unusually coherent nonsense. Then there is the one solid forensic clue, the paper itself. Watermarks reveal it was manufactured in Italy during the 1530s. This doesn't prove when the codex was written, paper could be stored for decades before use, but it gives a lower bound. At the very least, the materials are genuinely old. This alone sets the Rohonc Codex apart from many 19th century forgeries, which often betray themselves through anachronistic materials. From the moment it came to light, the manuscript's authenticity was questioned. Could it be an elaborate hoax, perhaps created to dupe a wealthy collector? Or is it the sole surviving record of a lost language or culture? The Hungarian scholarly world of the 19th century was sharply divided. Skeptics saw it as a clever trick. Others viewed it as a priceless artifact from an as-yet unknown chapter of European history. What no one could deny was the staggering scope of the script, a vast, rule-bound system that seemed far too complex for a mere prank. Even now, nearly 2 centuries later, that tension between forgery and authentic relic remains unresolved. From the outset, one of the strongest arguments for forgery pointed to a notorious figure in Hungarian antiquarian circles, Samuel Nemes. In the early 1800s, Nemes built a reputation, not only as a collector, but also, according to his detractors, as a skilled forger, and his alleged specialty was creating convincing but spurious historical documents and quietly slipping them into collections of genuine artifacts. This tactic gave his creations the credibility of their companions, while inflating the overall value overall value of the lot. The timing is hard to ignore. Enigmas was active in the 1830s, precisely when the Rohonc Codex surfaced in Count Battiani's library. For those inclined to suspicion, the match was too neat to be coincidence. The Codex's baffling script, strange mix of religious iconography, and absence of any known linguistic relatives fit neatly into the pattern of an invented object meant to impress rather than inform. As if Nemes did create it, he would have had the skill. Forgers of his ilk in the 19th century often had deep knowledge of paleography and access to period materials, and the Italian 16th century paper, with its watermark from the 1530s, would have been a perfect foundation for convincing the casual examiner. Add to this the fact that the Codex was donated as part of a large library, meaning it would not have been individually scrutinized upon arrival, and the forger's task seems even more plausible. Yet the case against Nemes has a fatal weakness: no direct evidence. Not a single letter, confession, or eyewitness account links him to the Codex. Moreover, a tantalizing archival record muddies the waters. A 1743 library catalogue lists a volume matching the Codex's description among prayer books decades before Nemes was even born. If that catalogue entry indeed refers to the Rohonc Codex, it would place the manuscript's existence nearly a century earlier, pushing it well beyond the reach of any 19th century forger. Even if one sets Nemes aside, the sheer effort behind the Codex challenges the hoax hypothesis. Unlike many historical forgeries, which rely on repeating a small set of symbols or recycling known scripts, the Rohonc text uses hundreds of unique characters in consistent sequences across hundreds of pages. This is a laborious feat for something with no audience beyond a single unsuspecting collector. As one skeptical 19th century scholar grudgingly admitted, it is a fraud so perfect as to be more admirable than the truth itself. The debate between cunning hoax and genuine relic has never been settled. What remains is an object that, whether born from deceit or devotion, demonstrates a level of planning and execution rarely matched in historical curiosities. And for the Codex, this unresolved tension would only grow sharper with the bizarre translations that began to emerge in the centuries that followed. The first wave of would-be translators approached the Rohonc Codex with enthusiasm that quickly slid into fantasy. In 1996, Hungarian scholar Attila Nyíri put forward what he claimed was the key, the manuscript. He argued was a link between ancient Sumerians and Hungarians. His process, however, read more like a conjuring trick than a disciplined decoding. Nyíri literally flipped the manuscript upside down, picked one symbol to stand for a Sumerian glyph, and then began assigning Latin letters to the rest based on how vaguely similar they looked, and when a particular sequence of letters failed to form a Hungarian word, he just simply changed the value of the symbols midstream. This flexible method allowed him to produce words he recognized, but at the cost of any internal consistency. Linguist Claus tore into the work almost immediately, and his assignments were arbitrary, his connections to Sumerian baseless, and his claimed translation collapsed the moment anyone else tried to replicate it. More damning still, there is no credible historical link between the ancient Sumerians and the Magyar people, making his premise untenable from the start. Only a few years later, in 2002, Romanian academic Viorica Enaciuc produced her own translation. She declared that the Codex was written in a vulgar Latin dialect from the ancient region of Dacia. Her reading order was right to left, bottom to top, a strange inversion with no support from the text layout or any known script tradition. Her resulting narrative told of 12th century Romanians battling Hungarians and nomadic horsemen, a storyline that conveniently echoed nationalistic themes in Romanian history. Like Neary's attempt, Enachic's work fell apart under close examination. The supposed Latin was inconsistent to the point of incoherence, destroying the repeating symbol patterns visible in the manuscript. Worse, her text had almost nothing to do with the Codex's illustrations, which feature Christian, Islamic, and possibly pagan symbols rather than depictions of medieval Dacian warfare. Scholars dismissed it as historical fiction, projected onto an unrelated artifact. These two failed translations reveal a recurring pattern in the Codex's modern history. Interpreters, bending the text to fit pre-existing national or cultural narratives, instead of deciphering the manuscript on its own terms, they impose meaning drawn from their own heritage, producing elaborate but unsustainable readings. The result has been to muddy the waters further, making it harder for genuine cryptanalysis to gain traction in the public eye. Yet for all their flaws, these attempts did confirm one thing: no simple substitution cipher or obvious known language lay beneath the Codex's symbols. If it is readable, it demands a far more disciplined and perhaps unconventional approach. That realization would guide the work of the 21st century scholars who took up the puzzle next, and in recent decades, a new generation of researchers has approached the Rohonc Codex not with grand historical claims, but with methodical cryptanalysis. Their starting point is a rejection of the idea that the manuscript is written in any known natural language disguised by a simple cipher. The sheer number of unique characters, close to 800, makes a straightforward substitution system impractical. Hungarian scholars have instead proposed that the text represents an artificial language, possibly created for a very specific purpose. One leading theory is that it is a Catholic reader compiled around 1593, containing paraphrased New Testament stories about Jesus. In this scenario, the manuscript was meant for internal use by a single, insular religious community, where the artificial script functioned as a shared code, as such codes were not unheard of, and in monastic life, and especially among orders that practice strict silence like the Cistercians or Trappists, complex sign languages and symbolic notations evolved to allow communication without speech. The monastic code hypothesis neatly accounts for two stubborn facts: the internal regularity of the script and its complete absence from any other known source. If the writing system was devised and used only within one monastery, it could vanish from history entirely once that community dissolved. As the illustrations, with their blend of Christian and non-Christian motifs, might represent adaptations of biblical scenes to local cultural contexts, or deliberate symbolic layering intended for those initiated into the code's meaning. And computational analysis has added weight to the rule-bound nature of the text. Here, statistical studies reveal repeating clusters of symbols that behave like words or phrases, and consistent spacing patterns that imply a grammar. But crucially, these patterns do not match the endings, prefixes, or syntactic markers of any known European language. This strengthens the view that the text language is an engineered construct. Despite the advances in methodology, a definitive reading has emerged, and every proposed solution still hits a wall, either in explaining all the symbols or in reconciling the text with the illustrations. And so the Codex remains suspended in a peculiar limbo, clearly structured, undeniably deliberate, yet mute to every attempt at understanding. Its survival over nearly 500 years, from 16th century paper mills to 21st century digital analysis, is a testament to both its material durability and its intellectual resilience. Whether the work of a lone eccentric, a tight-knit religious order, or an unknown culture, the Rohonc Codex continues to resist translation, an artifact that is, in every sense, unreadable but unforgettable. In the late summer of 1848, another mystery took shape, this time not bound between covers, but gliding through the waves of the South Atlantic, HMS Daedalus, a British warship en route from the Cape of Good Hope to St. Helena, was making steady progress when, on August 6th, the lookout cried out. Off the coast of what is now Namibia, something long and sinuous was cutting through the water. Officers and crew soon gathered on deck. The captain and his men watched as the creature held roughly 4 feet of its head and neck above the surface, the rest of its body trailing for what they estimated to be 60 feet or more. Combined, the total length could have approached 100 feet. The head was narrow, pointed, and flattened on top, dark brown in color with a lighter, yellowish-white throat. Along its back was a peculiar feature, what some described as a shaggy mane or a line of seaweed-like fringe. Its movement was deliberate and steady, keeping pace at 12 to 15 miles per hour, maintaining a straight course even in choppy seas. There was no spouting as in whales, no flippers breaking the surface. Occasionally it dipped beneath a wave, but always re-emerged in the same unbroken line. Hundreds of men saw it, and by some accounts the sighting lasted nearly 20 minutes. One lieutenant, Edgar Drummond, sketched it on the spot, placing a dorsal fin about 20 feet behind the head and what might have been a tail fin farther back. The captain later stressed just how close it had come close enough. He said that he could have recognized a man's face at the same distance. For seasoned Royal Navy officers to be startled was one thing. For them to risk their reputations on such a story was quite another. When Daedalus returned to England that autumn, the captain filed an official report to the Admiralty. By October 10, 1848, the Times of London had printed the account in full. A sea serpent, witnessed by trained naval officers, was headline material in the Victorian age. Public imagination surged. The idea that the deep might still harbour monsters from legend meshed perfectly with a century captivated by natural history and discovery. Credible witnesses were the linchpin. This was not a drunken whaler's yarn, but the testimony of disciplined men, many trained in navigation, observation, even natural science, and the report's authority was a double-edged sword. While it convinced a large swath of the public, it also provoked swift response from the scientific establishment, which had little patience for sea monsters, no matter who claimed to see them. What followed was not only a debate over one strange sighting, but a cultural clash between empirical caution and the Victorian appetite for wonder. The scientific counterattack came swiftly, led by Sir Richard Owen, one of Britain's most prominent biologists and an authority on marine mammals. Owen dismissed the idea of a serpent outright. In his view, the Daedalus crew had seen a large, unusual marine mammal, most likely an elephant seal, its appearance distorted by distance and sea conditions. He argued that the long tail trailing behind was nothing more than a wake of disturbed water. For the captain and his officers, Owen's explanation was not just wrong, it was insulting. These were men who had spent their careers at sea, familiar with every common creature in the oceans. The suggestion that they could mistake an elephant seal for what they had witnessed seemed absurd, especially given how close the creature had approached. The captain fired back publicly, standing by every detail of his report. the debate spilled into the press, with the Times giving space to both sides, as the spectacle was so public that it reached Parliament, where questions arose over whether naval officers should be lending credence to monster stories in the national papers, and the Admiralty, embarrassed by the attention, launched an inquiry into how the report had reached the press in the first place. But if officials wanted the matter to fade quietly, they underestimated Victorian print culture. The Illustrated London News soon published engraved depictions of the creature based on the officers' descriptions. These engravings striking images of a massive, maned serpent rising from the sea were reprinted across the English-speaking world. In an era before photography, such illustrations had the same viral power as sensational news images today, cementing the Daedalus serpent as a cultural phenomenon. The clash between Owen's measured skepticism and the captain's unwavering testimony also revealed a deeper fault line of the time, the tension between a rapidly formalizing scientific establishment and a public still enthralled by the possibility that Earth's frontiers held marvels yet undiscovered. For every sober zoologist who saw a misidentified whale or seal, there was a reader eager to believe that a relic of some prehistoric ocean still roamed the deep. In the weeks that followed, letters poured into newspapers with other supposed sightings, each eager to join the Daedalus in the growing catalogue of sea serpent lore. The debate was no longer about a single encounter, but about whether the oceans could still hide something truly unknown. Over time, the heat of the public argument cooled, but the Daedalus sighting refused to sink into obscurity. Instead, it shifted into a case study for both sides of the debate. Naturalists seeking rational explanations focused on known species behaving in unfamiliar ways. Owen's elephant seal idea lost traction quickly. Too small, too different in profile, but other possibilities emerged. One of the most enduring modern theories came from biologist Gary Galbraith in 2015. He suggested that the Daedalus crew may have encountered a sei whale feeding near the surface. Sei whales have long, dark backs, pointed heads, and pale undersides, matching much of the officer's description. The dorsal fin, typically located around 20 feet behind the head, also lined up with Lieutenant Drummond's sketch. In the right lighting, and at a particular angle, a sei whale's wake could appear as a continuous, serpentine body. Still, the skeptics of the whale hypothesis point to the mane-like feature reported along the back, a detail that doesn't fit neatly with any known cetacean. Some have speculated it could have been seaweed tangled on the animal, while others argue it was a visual distortion from waves breaking along its spine. Other explanations tread further into the improbable. Some have proposed a string of dolphins or small whales swimming in tight formation, misread as a single giant creature, optical illusions at sea mirages. Light refraction and wave shadows can certainly trick the eye, though the sustained 20-minute sighting and the number of experienced observers make a purely illusory event hard to defend. A few researchers even entertain the notion that the crew saw an unknown or now extinct species. In the 19th century, the discovery of previously undocumented large animals, such as the giant squid or the okapi, lent just enough plausibility to keep sea monster theories afloat. The more adventurous have speculated about massive eels, surviving plesiosaurs, or some undiscovered marine reptile. What makes the Daedalus account unusual is the credibility of the witnesses paired with their lack of any apparent motive to fabricate the story. Hoaxing a sighting would have invited ridicule and could have damaged naval careers indeed. The officers faced precisely that fallout simply for reporting what they saw. The consistency in their recollections, from sketches to written reports, has helped the case endure as one of the most intriguing in maritime history. In the end, the most cautious conclusion remains the simplest. The Daedalus crew saw a real, living animal, but misinterpreted its scale or form under the conditions at sea, and they're without a body, a photograph, or a repeat encounter, and the serpent of 1848 remains adrift, part of the enduring mythology of the deep. In late 1809, Europe was still gripped by the Napoleonic Wars, and the delicate work of diplomacy often played out in dangerous territory. Benjamin Bathurst, a 25-year-old British envoy and son of a bishop, had just failed in a high-stakes mission to persuade Austria to join Britain against Napoleon. With Austria defeated and French influence stretching across the continent, Bathurst knew that every mile between Vienna and the English Channel was enemy-haunted ground. He adopted the guise of a merchant, travelling under a false name, and planned a discreet journey north through Prussia to the port of Hamburg. From there, he hoped to slip back to England. The route was risky roads swarmed with deserters, bandits, and opportunists looking for prey, even in supposedly neutral Prussia. French agents operated in the shadows, and a lone traveller of means could vanish without a trace. On November 25, 1809, Bathurst and his courier, Herr Krause, stopped in the town of Perleberg, north of Berlin, for fresh horses. They took a meal at the White Swan Inn, while the changeover was arranged. Bathurst, ever cautious, intended to leave quietly under the cover of night, avoiding attention. Witnesses recalled him stepping out into the cold evening air around 9 p.m, wrapped in a heavy fur coat, perhaps to inspect the horses or speak to the driver. In that brief moment, he vanished. Krause emerged minutes later to find the courtyard empty. There had been no cry, no scuffle, just silence and darkness. When local authorities were alerted, the initial response was indifferent. Travellers sometimes went missing, especially in turbulent times. But when it became clear that the missing man was not a merchant, but a British diplomat, the mood shifted. Prussian officials ordered a search. Soldiers combed the streets, dragged the river, and questioned townsfolk. Within days, unsettling clues emerged. Bathurst's fur-lined cloak was discovered hidden in a stable behind the home of an inn worker. 2 weeks later, his trousers were found discarded in nearby woods, riddled with bullet holes but stained with no blood. Papers, including a letter to his wife, were still in the pockets. The odd staging suggested that someone wanted it to appear as though Bathurst had been ambushed and shot, but without leaving a body. Suspicion quickly fell on August Schmidt, an inn employee found in possession of the missing coat. He was arrested, but eventually released for lack of evidence. The only undeniable fact was that Bathurst had walked out into the night and never returned. In the politically charged atmosphere of 1809, the disappearance took on a life of its own. Whispers of espionage, assassination, and treachery filled the air. The absence of a body left every possibility open, and none could be ruled out. The investigation into Bathurst's fate deepened as the odd details piled up. The discovery of his cloak in Schmidt's stable was incriminating. Yet Schmidt offered no plausible explanation and faced no formal charge. The finding of Bathurst's trousers was stranger still. The fabric had been pierced by bullet holes, yet no blood stained them. This suggested the shots were fired after the clothing had been removed, perhaps as part of a staged crime scene meant to mislead investigators. Bathurst's wife, Phillida, refused to accept official silence. she travelled to the continent herself, pressing authorities in Prussia and even securing an audience with Napoleon. And to her face, Napoleon denied any French involvement, insisting that Bathurst's disappearance had nothing to do with his agents. Whether this was truth or calculated diplomacy remains a matter of speculation. Both the Prussian king and the British government offered rewards for information, but no credible witness came forward. In the absence of hard evidence, theories multiplied. The most straightforward explanation was that Bathurst had been robbed and murdered to locals. He was travelling with money, fine clothing, and personal effects temptations enough in a region impoverished by years of war. The suspicious behaviour of the inn staff, coupled with the distribution of his belongings, fit this scenario neatly, yet from the moment the story broke, the many in Britain suspected a darker plot. Bathurst had been an active opponent of Napoleon's policies. His work in Austria was aimed at undermining French dominance in Europe. If French agents knew his route, they could have seized him quietly. Proponents of this theory saw the missing body not as a sign of local banditry, but as evidence of a deliberate disappearance ordered from Paris. Decades later, in 1852, workers demolishing a building in Perleberg found a human skeleton buried beneath a threshold. The skull bore a massive fracture consistent with a blow from a heavy weapon. Locals whispered that Bathurst had finally been found, but in the absence of preserved evidence or forensic science, the claim could never be proven. The French, for their part, pushed back against British accusations, going so far as to insinuate that Bathurst had suffered a mental collapse. They pointed to his nervous state in his final days and claimed that the British diplomatic corps was notorious for employing unstable individuals, a jab as much political as personal. What is clear is that Bathurst's final hours were tense. Friends and witnesses recalled him as deeply anxious, convinced he was being watched. The letter to his wife, recovered from his discarded trousers, was disjointed and almost paranoid in tone. Whether this was the product of justified fear or the onset of a breakdown is unknown. Even with the multiple governments involved, no resolution ever came, and in the end, Perleberg became a ghostly waypoint in diplomatic history, a place where, in the space of a few quiet minutes, a man at the center of European power politics simply ceased to exist. And in the years that followed, new theories emerged to fill the vacuum left by the absence of proof. Some suggested that Bathurst, worn down by stress and fearing for his life, had abandoned his mission and gone into voluntary exile. The scattered, almost frantic tone of his last letter to Philida seemed to hint at a mind under immense strain. One rumour told of an unidentified Englishman boarding a ship from a Baltic port that winter, refusing to give his name. The vessel was said to have sunk in a storm, taking its secrets with it. Yet there is little to suggest Bathurst had planned such a flight. He carried important papers. His journey home was arranged, and no clear motive existed for self-imposed disappearance. Most historians still see the voluntary vanishing theory as improbable, especially for a man with his diplomatic rank and political connections. The more enduring explanation remains: the simplest Bathurst was the victim of robbery and murder, his body hidden beyond recovery. The suspicious trail of his belongings, first his coat, and then his trousers, both found under odd circumstances, fits the pattern of a clumsy attempt to obscure a straightforward crime. In an era when communication was slow and local justice, often provincial, such a case could easily dissolve into rumour. Still, the allure of espionage has kept alternative theories alive. The Napoleonic Wars were rife with covert operations, and foreign agents often operated far from formal battlefields. And to some, and the idea that French operatives intercepted Bathurst before he could leave the continent remains too compelling to dismiss outright. Napoleon's personal denial to Philida may have been genuine, but it may also have been calculated, a way to keep British accusations in check while protecting French prestige. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Bathurst case had taken on a ghostly aura in popular memory. It appeared in collections of historical mysteries alongside vanishing ships and unexplained deaths, each retelling shading the story a little darker. The lack of a body or final clue ensured that every theory remained, in some sense, equally plausible. 2 centuries on, the Perleberg disappearance still resists closure, and it stands as a reminder of how, even in an age of diplomatic formality and political order, a single figure could step into the shadows and never return, leaving history to argue endlessly over what became of him. By the winter of 1915, the remote settlement of Sankabetsu in Hokkaido was already a hard place to survive. The region's dense forests and deep snows pressed close on a handful of scattered homesteads, and the native Ussuri brown bears, nearly the size of North American grizzlies, were a constant, if mostly distant, presence. In mid-November, that uneasy balance broke. Mofama Ikeda Tamizo awoke one morning to find a massive male bear prowling his property. The animal stole corn from his storehouse and spooked his horse before retreating into the forest. Ikeda and a group of hunters, knowing the danger such a bold bear posed, kept watch for its return. On November 30th, they got their chance. The hunters fired, wounding the bear, and tracked its blood trail toward the mountains until a snowstorm forced them to give up the chase. They assumed the injured animal would avoid humans from then on. They were wrong. On the morning of December 9th, the bear reappeared, this time at the home of the Ota family. Inside were Abe Mayu, the farmer's wife, and an infant named Fumi Mio, whom she was babysitting. Without warning, the bear forced its way in, mauled the baby instantly. Mayu fought back with anything at hand, hurling firewood and trying to flee, but the bear overtook her, dragging her into the forest. When neighbors arrived, the floor was slick with blood. That night, armed villagers took positions around the Ota house, expecting the bear to return. At 8 p.m., it did the slipping back under cover of darkness. A panicked shot rang out, but the bear fled before it could be brought down. By dawn on December the 10th, a search party of 30 men found Mayu's body partially buried under snow near a fir tree cache. As if the bear meant to return to feed again, the hunters pressed deeper into the woods and sighted the animal, managing to wound it a second time. But that night, while most guards were away chasing a false alarm at the Ota farm, the bear struck the Miyoki family home. Inside were women and children seeking refuge, including Yayo Miyoki and members of the neighboring Saito family. The bear smashed through a window, overturning the cooking pot and extinguishing the lamp, plunging the house into darkness. Yayo tried to flee with her children, but her young son clung to her legs in terror, tripping her. The bear seized her, weighting the infant on her back. One guard, Odo, tried to draw the animal away, taking deep claw wounds in the process. He managed to escape with some of her children despite serious injuries. Inside, the bear mauled 3-year-old Miyoke Kinzo and 6-year-old Saito Haruyoshi, killing them both, and badly injured others. When rescuers arrived, they could hear the bear still rampaging inside. Some argued to burn the house down to kill it, but Yayo insisted there might be survivors. A plan was made. One group would make noise at the rear to drive the bear out the front, where others would shoot. The animal burst through the door as expected, but in the chaos, rifles misfired and shots went wide. The bear barreled past the line of men and disappeared once more into the forest. In just 2 nights, 6 people were dead and several more badly wounded. For many villagers, the bear was no longer merely an animal. It was something closer to a supernatural enemy, cunning and deliberate in its attacks. By December 11th, word of the attacks had reached regional authorities, and reinforcements arrived in Sankabetsu. Among them were seasoned bear hunters, including a local marksman with a reputation for killing the largest and most dangerous animals in Hokkaido. Villagers, desperate and fearful, huddled in the schoolhouse, the most defensible building in the area. Armed men patrolled at night, knowing the bear could strike again at any time. One controversial plan floated by the hunters was to use a victim's corpse as bait. Since the bear had returned to feed on human remains before, they reasoned the scent might draw it into the open. The idea horrified grieving families. When an attempt was made using the recovered body of Abe Mayu, the bear failed to appear, and the plan was abandoned in disgust. For the next 2 days, the animal eluded every search. It was seen raiding empty homes for food, ripping apart stores of dried goods and grain. On the night of December 13th, hunters near an ice bridge checkpoint spotted a shadow moving along the tree line and fired. Tracks and drops of blood suggested another wound, but the bear kept moving. The following morning, December 14th, the weather turned. Heavy snow was imminent, and the hunters knew a fresh fall would erase any tracks. 2 men, one the famed marksman, the other an experienced tracker, set out ahead of the storm. They followed the trail deep into the forest until they spotted the bear resting beneath a Japanese oak. Moving to within 60 feet, the marksman fired into its heart, then struck its head with a second shot. The great beast collapsed. When they examined the carcass, the scale of the animal stunned even the most hardened hunters. It stood nearly 9 feet tall and weighed roughly 750 pounds, enormous for an Usuri brown bear. A necropsy confirmed what they already suspected: human remains were in its stomach. The villagers exacted their own form of vengeance, dismembering and consuming parts of the bear's meat in a ritual meant to settle the score. But Sankabetsu never truly recovered. Many residents left in the months that followed, unwilling to live where the attacks had happened. Experts have long debated why the bear behaved with such persistence and ferocity. One theory is that it had awoken early from hibernation, ravenous and willing to take greater risks. Others note that it only turned predatory after being wounded by Akida's hunting party, a provocation that may have triggered its sustained assaults. Its size and prime physical condition likely made it confident in taking on humans. In the years after, the story became legend. A 6-year-old boy who survived the attacks, Haruyoshi Okawa, grew up to become a prolific bear hunter, claiming over 100 kills in his lifetime. Today, and the site is marked by reconstruction and statues, depicting the incident, a grim reminder of the winter, when one bear became a terror beyond nature. Some mysteries. Unlike Sankabetsu, never involved teeth or claws, only the stubborn power of human perception. In March 1823, American Captain Benjamin Morrell was sailing the schooner Wasp through the uncharted Weddell Sea, pushing into the icy reaches off Antarctica. His crew spotted what appeared to be a distant coastline to the west. Through the glass, they saw high, snow-covered mountains and what Morrell believed to be a continuous landmass stretching more than 300 miles. Unable to land due to pack ice, the Wasp followed the shore for days. Morrell named it New South Greenland, recorded its coordinates, and noted abundant seals and seabirds details that would later bolster his credibility. When he returned to port and published his account, the claim made waves in geographic circles. Some maps began to include the island as a vague outline or blank space, labeled with its new name. Morrell's reputation, however, was already mixed. Admirers saw him as a bold explorer. Critics accused him of exaggeration or outright invention. That didn't stop the idea of New South Greenland from taking hold. In an era when vast portions of the globe were still uncharted, a new Antarctic landmass was plausible enough to warrant further investigation. 15 years later, French explorer Jules Dumont d'Urville sailed to the reported coordinates. He found only open ocean and drifting ice where the coast should have been. His failure fueled skepticism, but it wasn't decisive. Navigational errors were common, and in polar waters, heavy fog or ice could hide entire coastlines. The possibility remained that New South Greenland was real, just misplaced on the map. In 1843, the idea received new life when British explorer Sir James Clark Ross reported glimpsing a hazy outline of land in roughly the same area, Guy. Unable to approach due to thick ice, Ross couldn't confirm it, but the sighting lent just enough legitimacy to keep cartographers interested. Throughout the mid-19th century, the Weddell Sea remained a blank space dotted with phantom coastlines. The persistence of such discoveries was no accident, as in the age of sail. A sailor's word, especially that of a captain, carried significant weight. Phantom islands often survived on maps for decades, sustained by repetition in atlases and the reluctance of publishers to erase what might prove real after all. In this way, New South Greenland joined the ranks of other maritime mirages, sightings born of hope, error, or optical illusion, yet treated as geographic fact. The final verdict on New South Greenland would not come until the early 20th century, when Antarctic expeditions began probing the Weddell Sea in earnest. In 1912, German explorer Wilhelm Filchner led the Deutschland into the region, intent on solving the riddle. By chance, his ship became trapped in pack ice near Morrell's reported coordinates, an ideal, if unplanned, opportunity to settle the matter. Filchner's team trekked across the ice, scanning for any hint of a shoreline. There was none, to be certain, and they drilled through the ice and measured the ocean depth below. The readings showed thousands of feet of water far too deep for any landmass to exist there. Whatever Morrell and Ross had seen, it wasn't land. Filchner concluded that New South Greenland was nothing more than an illusion. His findings, however, were slow to circulate. The First World War loomed, and polar exploration was not a priority. It wasn't until 3 years later that the final nail was driven in. In 1915, Ernest Shackleton's Endurance expedition also became trapped in the Weddell Sea, within sight of where New South Greenland was meant to be. Shackleton's men, too, witnessed distant shapes on the horizon, towering mountains that slowly dissolved into the air. They had seen a Fata Morgana, a type of polar mirage in which layers of cold and warm air bend light to produce phantom images of distant icebergs, or even inverted landscapes. In the right conditions, a mirage can look like solid land, complete with peaks and valleys, and persist for hours. Soundings taken by Shackleton's crew confirmed what Filchner had found beneath the ice lay nothing but deep ocean. By the 1920s, cartographers quietly erased New South Greenland from official maps, relegating it to the long list of phantom islands, places that existed only in the interplay between human eyes and the tricks of light. Yet its story, like the Rohonc Codex or the Serpent of the Daedalus, endures as a reminder discovery is not always a matter of finding something new, but of finally proving that it was never there at all. Thank you for journeying through these accounts of the enigmatic, the unexplained, and the forgotten. From cryptic manuscripts and phantom islands to vanished diplomats, relentless predators, and uncharted seas, each story reminds us how much of history lies in the tension between what we know and what we can only guess. Until we meet again for the next chapter of history and mystery,